Every franchise has them. The characters that make you reach for the remote to fast forward, the ones that were so annoying you physically couldn't watch. Cars isn't out of it, and before anyone comes for me in the comments, I love this franchise, I really do, but loving something means being honest about the parts that didn't work. And Cars has some characters that fans have been avoiding for years. Let's get into it. Mater, the character who hijacked his own franchise. I'll start with the most controversial one because we need to address it. Mater is one of the most beloved supporting characters in Pixar history. In Cars 1, he's perfect. He's the heart of Radiator Springs, as well as McQueen's first real friend. He's funny without being exhausting. Every scene he's in works because he's exactly where he's supposed to be. In the background, cheering, being Mater. And then Cars 2 happened. Cars 2 took Mater and made him the main character of a spy thriller, and I sat there watching it thinking this redneck did not need his own show. Because Mater works as a supporting character, he works as a lovable sidekick who says the wrong thing at the right moment and somehow saves the day by accident. He did not need to be the star of the movie. An entire movie built around him doing spy stuff in Japan and Italy and London, that's completely different, and it doesn't work. Here's the specific problem. Mater's humor is based on misunderstanding. He takes things literal. He wanders into situations he doesn't understand and survives by pure luck. That's funny for 5 minutes. For an hour and 40 minutes, it becomes exhausting because the joke never changes. Every scene is some version of Mater accidentally doing something right because he's too clueless to know he shouldn't. And the worst part is that Cars 2 sacrifices McQueen to make this work. The movie that was supposed to be about Lightning McQueen becomes a movie where McQueen is a supporting character in his own franchise so that Mater can have his spy adventure. McQueen's emotional arc in Cars 2 is about learning to accept Mater for who he is, which sounds nice until you realize that McQueen had already done that in Cars 1. His entire growth in the first movie was learning to value people who aren't like him. Cars 2 walked that back and gave him the same lesson again just to justify centering on Mater. Fans felt that, and it's why Cars 2 is the lowest rated movie in the franchise by a significant margin. How Pixar could have done it better? Keep Mater as a comic relief, give McQueen a real rival in Cars 2. The spy plot could have been worked as a background element without making Mater the lead. Let the franchise stay about racing and legacy and the friendships built around those things. Moving on, we have a more complicated story because this character was actually well written. Cruz Ramirez, the successor nobody asked for. Now, Cruz Ramirez had a really touching backstory. The scene where she tells McQueen she's always wanted to race but was too scared is one of the best scenes in Cars 3. Her growth across the movie's earned. The problem is the ending. When Cruz Ramirez crosses that finish line in McQueen's place, a lot of fans felt like they were watching something get taken out of them. And I get it, because the whole movie built itself as McQueen's comeback story. He crashed, he trained, he fought to prove he still had it, and then in the final act, he hands his number to Cruz and becomes her pit crew chief. It felt like a forced attempt to phase out McQueen, and that feeling's valid even if the intention behind it was good. Cars 3 spent the entire runtime building emotional investment in McQueen's comeback. Every training montage, every conversation with Doc Hudson's ghost, every moment of doubt and recovery, all of it pointed toward McQueen crossing that finish line and proving something. And then, the movie changed what it was proving in the final 20 minutes. The twist is that McQueen chose this. He chose to let Cruz race, which is meant to be his growth moment, his Doc Hudson moment. He becomes the mentor instead of the racer, and thematically that works, but it works on paper better than it works emotionally, because by the time Cruz takes the wheel, you've spent an hour and 40 minutes wanting McQueen to win. Pixar built that want deliberately and then didn't deliver on it. The emotional math doesn't quite add up. There's also the succession problem. Cruz becoming the new face of racing feels rushed because we only know her for one movie. Doc Hudson's legacy worked in Cars 3 because we had 2 movies of McQueen and Doc's relationship to draw from, even though Doc was barely in Cars 2. Cruz has 1 movie, One training montage, one emotional breakdown scene, and then she's handed the entire future of the franchise. How Pixar could have done it better? Let McQueen win the Florida 500 himself, then end the movie with him choosing to mentor Cruz for the next season. Give her the setup without making his comeback a sacrifice. The emotional payoff would have been bigger, and Cruz's future would have felt earned rather than handed to her. While Cruz might have been avoided for several reasons, the next character is avoided by many fans for one reason, and that reason alone: trying to end McQueen's career. Jackson Storm, the villain with nothing to say. Jackson Storm is one of the most visually intimidating villains in the entire Cars franchise. Sleek black body, blue lightning bolt, he looks like someone built specifically to end McQueen's career, and he almost does. But here's the thing about Storm. He got just enough screen time to make you clock his arrogance, and that was all. It works for what the movie needed him to be. Unlike Chick Hicks, the schemer, he's actually a symbol. Sorta like how people say technology is replacing experience. You don't need Storm to have a complex inner life for that to land. What fans find frustrating is that the movie uses Storm as a motivator and then disposes of him. His whole role is to make McQueen feel old and then get beaten by Cruz at the end. He has no real arc, he doesn't change, he doesn't learn anything. He's just a very fast, very rude car who exists to be defeated. And let's not even forget about how rude he is. It has insecurity underneath it. Chick Hicks was arrogant because he'd spent his entire career being second and couldn't handle it. That backstory made his villainy feel personal. Storm has no backstory, he was built to race and he's good at it, and he knows it. That's literally the whole character. The specific moments that stick out are the ones where he dismisses McQueen publicly. The photo op after winning, the retirement comments, the way he treats Cruz as a joke when she shows up in his racing colors. All that lands because Armie Hammer's voice performance is genuinely cold in a way that makes you want Cruz to absolutely destroy him. And she does, which is satisfying, but you're left wondering what Storm actually wanted beyond winning. What was he afraid of? What did he have to lose? We never find out. How Pixar could have done it better? Give Storm one scene of vulnerability. One moment where his mask slips. A conversation with his crew chief where you see that arrogance is covering up something. You don't need to make him sympathetic, you just need to make him three-dimensional. Right now, he's a very well-designed obstacle rather than a villain. Jack Storm might have been a low-budget villain. But next, we have a villain so vain, everyone simply hates him for it. Chick Hicks, the villain who overstayed his welcome. Chick Hicks is one of the great animated villains of the 2000s. In Cars 1, he's perfectly positioned. He's the car who will do anything to win. He cheats, he crashes people, he causes the King's retirement crash in front of the entire world and celebrates it. He's despicable in exactly the right way. And then he shows up in Cars 3 as a sports commentator. The idea of Chick Hicks as a pundit is actually interesting. A disgraced cheater who now talks about racing on television because nobody will let him race anymore. There's something poetic about that. The guy who ruined the King's last race now sits in a studio and watches other people race. But Cars 3 doesn't really do anything with that. He's just there to be annoying on screen, to make snide comments about McQueen's age, to be the smug talking head that reminds you he's still awful. It's not enough to ruin the movie, but it's also not enough to justify bringing him back. The specific frustration fans have with Chick across both appearances is that he faces no real consequence for how shitty he's been. He causes one of the most horrific crashes in Piston Cup history, loses the goodwill of every fan in the stadium in Cars 1, and then somehow has a television career by Cars 3. The sport just took him back in a different role, which might be realistic, but it isn't satisfying at all. How Pixar could have done it better? Either leave Chick in Cars 1 where he belongs, or commit to his Cars 3 storyline properly. Give him a real scene with McQueen, let them confront each other about what happened to the King. There's a whole conversation between those two characters that the franchise never had, and it would have been one of the most interesting scenes in Cars 3. Moving on, we have the villain Cars 3 deserved, but didn't even use. Sterling. Sterling is a fascinating case because he's a villain who could have been genuinely complex, and the movie chose to make him straightforwardly awful instead. Sterling owns Rust-eze. He bought it specifically because McQueen's brand is worth money. He wants McQueen to retire not because he cares about his well-being, but because a retired legend sells more merchandise than a losing racer. That's a genuinely interesting villain motivation. Corporate exploitation of athletic legacy is a real thing that happens to real athletes all the time, but Cars 3 never goes into the complexity of that. Sterling is just mean about it. He's dismissive, he's condescending, he pulls McQueen from the Florida 500 mid-race. He's the obstacle between McQueen and his dream, and the movie doesn't really interrogate why someone like Sterling exists, or what he represents beyond being greedy. The moment fans cite most is when Sterling threatens to bench McQueen if he loses the Florida 500. The entire deal they make is that if McQueen loses, he has to retire and become a merchandise ambassador. Which is exactly what Sterling wanted from the start. He built a scenario where he wins either way. That's actually quite clever for a villain, but the movie doesn't give Sterling enough space to be clever. He's just the bad guy in a suit who gets defeated when Cruz wins. How could Pixar have done it better? Give Sterling a scene where he explains his philosophy. Let him make the case that he's actually protecting McQueen. Let the audience wonder for 10 minutes whether he has a point. The best villains think they're right, but Sterling never even gets to make his argument. Okay, so the next two characters are the most unnecessary I've ever seen in a movie. Stay with me now. Van and Minnie, the characters nobody needed. Van and Minnie are the tourist couple who get lost in Cars 1 and accidentally end up in Radiator Springs looking for directions. They're meant to be comic relief, a bickering couple who represents the kind of tourists who bypass Radiator Springs without a second thought.
And you all know what to do. All right, nobody panics. Here we go.
Man, I just don't see any on-ramp anywhere.
Minnie, I know exactly where we are.
The problem is, they're not funny enough to justify the screen time the movie gives them. Their whole story is Van refusing to ask for directions and Minnie being frustrated about it. That's a joke that was already old when Cars 1 came out in 2006. The movie uses it anyway, and then uses it again, and then uses it one more time. They don't contribute to the plot, they don't have any meaningful interaction with McQueen or the residents of Radiator Springs. They show up, they're annoying, and then they leave. The only thing they accomplish is reminding you that the outside world exists and that Radiator Springs is off the beaten path, which the movie already told you multiple times through better characters. How Pixar could have done it better? Cut them entirely or replace their function with one of the Radiator Springs residents reflecting on how few visitors they get. The same storytelling beat without the dated joke and the wasted screen time. So there it is, the Cars characters that fans have been quietly side-eyeing for years. Some of them are genuinely badly written, some of them are good ideas that got mishandled, and some of them are just in the wrong movie at the wrong time. But that's what makes Cars such an interesting franchise to dig into, because for every character that doesn't land, there's a McQueen or a Doc Hudson or a Sally that absolutely does. And the gap between those two things is where all the most interesting conversations live. Drop your take in the comments. Which Cars character do you think deserved better, and which one do you wish had never existed?